My name is Ted Isbell. I'm a forensic architect with Vertex Companies based here in Boise. I am an architect, so you're getting a lot of architect-heavy content today, which some of us don't have a problem with. We're going to kick off the panel discussion this morning. I'm just going to do a quick intro of the panelists and the moderator here. So, second from the left for you, Crystal Rain is the Planning and Zoning Manager for the City of Boise. With strong background in community service and sustainable development, Crystal is known for working collaboratively with stakeholders to find innovative solutions for creating dynamic built environments that foster engagement, resilience, and equity. Her experience includes land use planning and permitting, clean energy development, human-centered transportation, change management, and policy research. To her right, Tim Keene is the newly appointed Director of Planning and Development Services for the City of Boise. He served in this role since March of 2022. He is a former commissioner for the City of Atlanta, Georgia, not Idaho, as well as the Director of Planning, Preservation, and Sustainability for Charleston, South Carolina, and is also a former Director of Planning for the town of Davidson, North Carolina. He holds Master of Science in Architecture and City Planning from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, as well as being honored as the Knight Fellow in Community Building, City Planning and Design from the University of Miami School of Architecture. Third from the left, second from the right, Brad Smith is a local architect with Ball Ventures Alquist. He has been practicing architecture in the commercial realm in the Treasure Valley for the last 12 years. Former colleague and co-worker of mine at CSHQA, a close friend and a neighbor. He joined a team of Babcock Design Group in 2012 and then worked there until 2018 where he became the in-house architect for Ball Ventures Alquist. Lastly at the table, Mark Hazel is a principal at Lombard Conrad Architects in Boise. Throughout Mark's career, he's worked on a wide range of projects such as medical, financial, justice, higher education, and government. Recently, he's focused more on financial and justice institutions. And these are not my words, somebody else's. Though he can't help himself and will take on any type of unique project. That's bold. That's kind of opening the door for a lot of project types. He holds licenses in 6 states, including Idaho, and among other things, he's involved with the Urban Land Institute. Finally, our moderator today, another friend of mine, Bill Rauer. Bill is a general manager of Merchants Moving and Storage and iWest Company. Served Treasure Valley with logistics planning solutions for residential and commercial customers since 1944. The company, not Bill. And the reason I asked Bill to come up here is because in a previous life with Albertsons Incorporated, he was involved with commercial real estate development for Albertsons. He holds a Master of Architecture from Boise State University, MBA, as well as a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Idaho. So give these folks a warm welcome, and Bill, you're up.
Hey, got both mics. Yeah. So, there's your cut off there, but you can see who's on the panel by name. Thanks for the intros, Ted. Got much more than I deserved. So, we're going to use these as our seed questions. These are the plans, and we'll just kind of walk down through that. And I guess the best way to do that might be I guess when we say entitlements, what do we mean? It'd be nice to hear about that from either Brad or Mark. So,
yeah,
take a stab at it.
So typically, when we refer to entitlements, or when an architect is engaged or design professional is engaged for entitlements, we look at that more for land use. What impacts on this proposed site are city, utility, other government entities going to impose on this site that you're not aware of when you first either get a survey done or just evaluate the site for your use. There's generally quite a bit of imposed requirements on a site. And when I say imposed requirements, I even mean environmental agencies or roadway departments. We run into situations before where ITD or ACHD has feature plans that could impact your parcel use. Also, how the city is evaluating the future proposed uses of this area. So the entitlement phase allows the owner and their design professional, if one is brought on early, to engage in the site, to start evaluating it, and to start meeting with city agencies. We're generally, if we're fortunate enough, brought on early in the process to help the owner evaluate the site and meet with those local agencies. There's a great advantage to moving into, say, a tenant space that is been developed by a larger developer like BVA. They have an in-house architect, they have in-house planners that do a lot of this legwork for you. So being able to evaluate, say you're a small business, being able to look at a tenant improvement space, at the shell space, can save you a lot of time in going through that process. Really, an architect, when brought on early in the entitlement phase, is here to protect your vision and to protect your dollars. You're evaluating the site for, say, most sites, most projects are about $5 to $6 million on the smaller side. If you're looking at a single-use parcel, bringing on a design professional early on generally costs about 1% of that overall project cost. We know what we should be looking for. We know the right questions to ask. Any design professional brought on should be able to dig into the history of that site. The worst thing you can ever hear as an architect is an owner saying, hey, I bought this great site, it's got great frontage, and it's got a pretty good history. It used to be a service station. If any of you know what that means that sends off red flags. And this happens more often than you would think, where a piece of property is purchased and you dig through the history of it and you come to find that there's a storied history of tanks buried, and any development or touching of that site could lead to significant cost impacts when it comes to remediating or mitigating the potential oil and potential drums below that site. So that's really what we're here to do, is to help you through the process. I would say we come on as design professionals to sit at the table with the owner and with the government agencies to help understand the overall impact that you could be facing with the potential purchase of that site. Don't want to be remiss.
No, I think you covered it pretty well, honestly, on that. I think the partnerships, like you said, early and often, getting everybody on the same page early is really a big key for us. So you have the whole design team, you've got the cities we work with, whether it's ACHD or other transportation, ITD, any of the team members, and then also the end user there, whoever that may be for us.
Terrific, thanks. Does the word entitlements mean anything different for either Tim or Crystal?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great description of that. I'd say when we at the City of Boise refer to entitlements, it's a little bit different. We mean the process of obtaining the necessary permits and applications for moving forward with any given project. And this can be as simple as a 2-week administrative review or something more in-depth for like a rezone or an annexation process that can last much longer, have a number of pre-submittal tasks, a number of public hearings before a decision is rendered. And like you alluded to, those approvals do come with a set of conditions that go along with that entitlement or improvement or approval.
Great. And then the next question we have up there is
So sorry, can I fill in one more?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So to expand on that, when we typically deal with entitlements, it's everything up to or prior to submission of the for a building permit. So that's generally sitting down throughout the course of the project with multiple agencies and evaluating what needs to be required, what needs to be approved before we actually submit the building permit.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so the next question is it refers to due diligence, and so due diligence encompasses a lot, but we should share there. Is there anything beyond that, beyond entitlements, in terms of due diligence that would be in play?
I think for us, like Mark was saying, we don't want to get a site that is not developable or doesn't meet the owner or the tenant, whoever the end user's needs are. So I'd say really vetting that on the front end as proactive as you can. There's always going to be unforeseens you have. Would be a big one on due diligence. Obviously price, time and money comes into it too. Can we purchase the land or can it be developed in the time frame that we need? Would be a couple more, those restraints.
Yeah, finances could be an important piece, right? Great, is there anything to add to that?
I mean, yeah, it's just generally doing your homework, understanding the history of the parcel, seeking to get a base understanding of our development code and our requirements, as well as any other external agency policies or regulations, just to make sure that you can actually do what you're looking to do on the parcel.
I guess one more. When looking at the due diligence period, if you're a potential purchaser, having a due diligence period with the seller is critical, an appropriate due diligence period, so that you have time to vet out all the necessary requirements before you purchase that property. And when I say that, it is, due diligence could change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction depending on where you're working. And I say that from a time standpoint. A lot of agencies are overwhelmed or behind. We're working in Airway Heights, Washington right now, and we have a 4-month permit review duration for a 5,000 square foot building. If you backtrack that to our due diligence period, having an understanding with the owner that the process of getting through CZC or getting through design review or having a full understanding of the site you're purchasing could take time. It's important to have that within your due diligence period documents with the owner, or having the possibility of an extension if you're seeing that the due diligence time frame could run longer than expected, so that you're not locked into a situation where you are responsible for the purchase of that site, or you have to purchase that site without full site investigation.
Yeah, great comments, and then a nice segue into the next piece. And maybe either Tim or Crystal can take this one. What does your typical entitlement process look like? And I know that's a mouthful, but let's take a shot.
Well, it might be helpful. I've got some slides here I might go through quickly, just because in answer to that question, and really the next two, we need to acknowledge that in the city of Boise's case, we're about to implement a new zoning ordinance. So all we're talking about relative to entitlement has a direct relationship to the zoning laws of the city, and we've got a new collection of laws that are coming up. So I might just run through these quickly, which could provide a platform for discussion among this group. But the existing zoning ordinance in Boise was adopted in 1966. So this isn't something too often. It's rare that a city really replaces its entire zoning ordinance. Yes, you're constantly making changes to zoning, of course, but to entirely replace it is not typical. And so here we are in Boise with a new set of rules, the first time in 60 or so years. And so there's going to be a new process associated with that. I did want to mention the goals with this new ordinance. We went through a multi-year process to create this set of rules. It was adopted by City Council in June. And in 1966, we weren't experts in sprawl. We became experts in sprawl. And Boise's opportunity right now, I think, is to become experts in growing in the opposite direction. And we've learned from cities all across this country, look at every valley in the West, that if we continue to build like we've been building, we're in deep trouble when it comes to transportation, water, real issues. And so we've got an opportunity to learn to do something different. So how do we enable through this new zoning ordinance a variety of housing? How do we have a less water and energy consumptive development pattern? How do we give more people in Boise options for how they get around? Because we've proven time and again that if everyone must drive to do every single thing, we'll never be able to build enough highways. Welcome to Atlanta, Georgia. I just came from there, so I can verify this. And then the last thing is a development pattern that we can actually afford in the city. The taxpayers of the city can afford it. So those were the kind of goals, and we feel are very well represented in these new regulations. Go to the next slide. So just to let you know, on December 1st, this is a new zoning in the city. So every property in the city, starting December 1st, will have a different set of rules related to them. For a lot of commercial property, the zoning is actually changing. And then within the neighborhoods, the zoning that exists will have different rules. And actually, you'll have more options for how you build in the neighborhood. So starting December 1st, we'll have a new zoning map and new regulations around every parcel in the city. Go to the next one. As it relates to entitlement, when you're dealing with zoning, there's some level of complexity associated with it. It's inevitable. We've got thousands of properties in the city across 86 square miles. You know, you're dealing with somebody adding onto their house, but also somebody building a 20-story building. So there's some complexity in this. In this new ordinance, what we tried to do is simplify it by putting within these 4 types every kind of building that we have in the city. And the distinction is that types 1 and 2 do not require a public hearing. Types 3 and 4 do. We're talking entitlement. So when I say public hearing, to Crystal's point about annexation or rezoning, those kinds of things have to go all the way through City Council by state law. So they'd be a type 4. So if you're in a public hearing, you're a type 3 or 4. If you're not, you're a type 1 or 2. You can go to the next slide. This provides, and this will all be available, but this is the kind of menu of things that are within the types. This isn't a huge screen, so I know some of this is hard to read, but I'll just mention that within type 2, we tried to put things that we in the ordinance and in this process with the community said are things we want to make simpler to do. The things we've said to achieve those goals on that slide I had earlier, we need these things. So we would put them in a type 2 so you're not in a public hearing. So if you're building a quadruplex in a neighborhood, or we've added this thing called allowed use, allowed form, and allowed use alternative form. So we've identified a few corridors in the city that we know are especially important to have density. So Fairview or State Street, for instance, areas that we know we not only want density, we need it. So in those places, you're allowed use, allowed form if you're building tall and mixed use. So if you're 4 stories or higher, you're allowed use, allowed form, no public hearing. If you're building less dense, single-story building, a surface parking lot, you need a public hearing. So essentially, it was kind of flipping in these locations where we not only want but need density, flipping that entitlement process on its head and saying, we want to help people that are building densely. So that's how this new process will work. And then next slide. That's not it. Okay, there you go. Back a couple. This gets into those regulations, but I don't need to go into this detail. But the point is kind of generally for this group to say that starting December 1st in the city, we'll have a new process related to entitlement. It'll be important to start to get to know those 4 types and where within those 4 you fall, because that will be where your entitlement process will be determined. Type 1 or 2, no public hearings. Type 3 or 4, you will have them. So I forget the question, honestly, but nonetheless, we did think it was important, since this is coming up soon, December 1st, to give you some orientation around this thing, so you can start. We'll have a new website up. We'll have all this work we're doing to get the word out about this. But the entitlement process in the city is getting ready to change, and it's a good thing because any city that develops an ordinance 60 years ago and is constantly, amending it over 60 years, the process becomes hard to follow. So now we get a chance to reset and say, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Here's a process that helps make that possible.
Awesome, that's terrific, that answers the question.
And so to say when you flipped it on your head, when you flipped it on its head, the old process, the process that we're accustomed to when it comes to administrative review is say like a TI of an existing building or a new owner that's moving in. The impact on that site is, or say a bare parcel with a single family development or a small business, the process used to be, that could be passed through administrative review quickly, where the higher rise, the 8-story would take more time for a public hearing type of meeting. So under previous, so current, you flip that on its head where we now have that is more of an administrative review, which from a taxpayer standpoint and from a bogging down of city agencies, I think is a really good move. And that we're excited to see, because the administrative review process has always been a great mechanism to help alleviate and help speed up processes within city and county agencies. And so I think this is going to really expedite that.
Let me just say one thing. I just want to make clear that if you have an existing building in a commercial zone in the city and you're like swapping out tenants, that doesn't apply to what I just said. So the thing I said about flipping it on its head, it has to do with new construction redevelopment. So you've got a shopping center site on Fairview, which is currently zone C2 probably or something like that. It becomes MX3, and you want to redevelop that shopping center site. So that's the case where this allowed use, allowed form kicks in. But if you're just swapping out tenants,
We're doing a small expansion on the building.
yeah, that's a different case, because that just is following the simpler process. It's when you're doing new construction and that kind of thing. And a piece of good news is here, Crystal, who's with us and leads that zoning team, she is leading this effort there's all this training happening right now for staff, so that when the new ordinance comes into effect, Crystal and her team is really working on how can we help people navigate these processes, because it's new, and it'll take time for people to get to know it. But the good news is you've got Crystal and her team who are really dedicated servants in terms of trying to make this understandable to people.
And there's Crystal, there's your slide if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, we can
And let me say this, before Crystal explains this, this isn't as complex as it looks. Okay, don't judge us on this yet. Sit with it for a minute. But the reason this was put together is it actually is as I said, when we had an ordinance that dates to 1966, you couldn't even create something like this because nobody knew what the process was. You know what I mean? It didn't make any sense. So now we have a route for you to take.
Yeah, and so I would say it's very simple if you don't look at this. So currently our entitlement process is, I think, pretty standard for a city. You've got a couple pre-submittal tasks, a pre-application meeting, a neighborhood meeting, and then you go ahead and submit. And what we were finding under our current code is we were doing a lot of troubleshooting after submittal. We're doing a lot of the negotiation, we're working out the friction points between agencies after an applicant or a developer has put in a lot of resources to these plans, to these concepts. So what we did in our new process is we really put a lot of that work, that review, those flagging ahead of submittal. So I won't try to follow along with this, but basically if you've got a very simple type 1 or type 2 administrative application, your checkpoints are going to be, you have a conversation with somebody from our team. We say, that sounds pretty good. You go back, you get your site plan together. We're hoping that this would be about a 25% like concept development, right? At that point, we can sit there and go, oh, actually this footprint is going to interfere with, let's say, solid waste. So we'll have to move some things around. We know that ACHD is going to have issues with this access point. So you are told about this before the money has been sunk into the full development. After that concept review is done, if you're a type 1 and a simple type 2, you submit, a simple 2-week process again. If you've got that allowed use alternative form, something more complex, it's still administrative, but you might have to do a neighborhood meeting or an interdepartmental review, which is a new feature we're really excited about. So anything that's more complex that goes on to a public hearing is going to have this new thing, and it's basically that pre-application meeting, but like on steroids. So you as the applicant come in with maybe a 50% concept development. You sit with planners, you sit with other impacted departments, again, solid waste, fire, perhaps you have parks there, the Ada County Highway District, anybody else who may be impacted, ITD, CCDC, and everybody sits in a room and goes through the concept, the site plan together, and so everyone can kind of hear if there's any conflicting policies, and so that can be worked out as a team. And so you as the developer, as the applicant, can take those comments and rework before you've done the full plan set. And so hopefully, by the time you submit for one of those larger projects, it's a very simple take to hearing and there's not a lot of kinks to work out. So we're really just trying to front load all of the stuff that happens post submittal now. Maybe you can see that here. I can't tell.
In the city of Boise, to heap some praise on them, has probably one of the most robust processes. When I say robust, I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that it drags the process out. We've worked in jurisdictions where there isn't this pre-application, pre-submittal process or entitlement process, and then a end date for responses. And the city has a very clean-cut process that has really helped not only the design professionals, but the owners in the long run. So they've had this process in place for a significant amount of time, and it's just becoming more and more robust and also more streamlined. And we've really been impressed with the pre-application meeting process. Being able to, within, a week or two in some cases, be able to get a hold of, submit your request for a pre-application meeting, get everybody at a table, and identify some of the issues that might be happening with the site that you as the owner or you as a design professional might not be aware of, like with wastewater or with garbage disposal or whoever might be trying to access that site. So it's been a very helpful process to have that checklist online so that everybody can check it, can monitor it, and maintain it.
Great. Anything? I know this might look complex to you. This looks.
I'll give it a shot. So let me stay there for a minute because to demystify this thing, go back.
Yep.
So really and again, over a little bit of time, we'll get used to speaking to these type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, but on the top left is where you start the process. And so if you're a type 1 or 2A, you can see at the end of that first line, you have an off-ramp, you're done. So all you have is early assistance, which was spoken to, and you talk to a planner. Okay, the planner says, oh, you're a type 2, so this is your process. That's early assistance. So you go do your work, then you have, as Crystal was talking about, a concept review meeting, so you get everybody together at 25% to say, are there any issues here? Does ACHD have an issue with the driveway or this or that? Figured out a concept review, and then you have your off-ramp if you're a type 1 or 2, so it's fast. At the bottom, you see these public hearings, so City Council, Planning and Zoning, Design Review Commission stuff. Those that get all the way to the bottom are just those ones that are 3 and 4s, and so they're more complex, and there's going to be a bit more of a process to them. What's been added, that Crystal mentioned, is also in red or orange there, interdepartmental review. And the reason for that is that, as Crystal said, if you've already submitted, so you're on the clock in terms of your time with your client, or if you're a developer as a developer, and you don't know what your issues are, and then after submittal, you're heaped with all these problems, it can become incredibly frustrating. And again, it's like, tell me what the process is. Because I've submitted, and now I'm going in 6 different directions, chasing all these things. So the idea with the interdepartmental review is that we get everybody around the table and say, let's identify everything that you need in this process and make sure that when you submit, you know that. So it's not unclear to you. So that's what's been added. So really it's just the top line if you're a type 1 or 2A. And the ones that go all the way to the bottom line are just those things that have to go to planning and zoning and city council because they're pretty complex and it's a rezoning or it's an annexation. The things that by state law require a public hearing.
Yeah, the interdepartmental review is really, unfortunately, unique across the country in my time with Albertsons. It wasn't uncommon to get into that point and then go here, talk to these folks, and then come back and okay, we're ready to go, now you need to talk to them. It was, yeah, if you're a whitewater rafter or kayaker, it's getting caught in an eddy. And there doesn't seem to be any way to escape. So that's a nice piece that, no, this is everything right here. You're going to be moving on, yes, onto the public hearings, and those are not the easiest thing in the world, but they're necessary, but you know going in that you're lined up properly in your design, right? Anything else you want to share about any of that?
Maybe if there's members of the audience change.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks kind of like chutes and ladders. I'm wondering where the heck to start is.
I love that you said that because we've been saying that. And actually the best shoots and ladder addition to this, which may be the next graphic version of this, is if you're a type 2B. So I mentioned type 2. Type 2s don't need a public hearing to get done. But there's a type 2A and B. And what distinguishes the two is type 2B is a little bit more complex. So if you've got that shopping center site on Fairview, so it's multiple acres and it's a redevelopment of a 7-story building and all this mixed use, it's a little bit more complex. It's still a type 2, but it's a type 2B. So you do have to go to interdepartmental review. So the chutes and ladders aspect of it would be that you go from concept review, get some feedback there, and start working on the plan again. And then you have the ladder, I guess, or it would be the chute that goes from there to the interdepartmental review. You don't have neighborhood review. See, so you skip over that and go right to interdepartmental review just to make sure, hey, all those issues in the concept review in this complex site got dealt with. Now you're approved. So you don't go to the bottom line either. So, yeah, it's interesting you said that because we've been talking about the same thing.
Great, yeah, thank you. Any other questions, Ellie? About anything.
I'm just curious what development looks like right now versus maybe a few years ago. Like, how many cranes do we have up in here? How many, projects are going? Like, does the flow seem to have slowed down, or kind of where are we at?
Right now, the thing about the flow right now is that we do have some big things going on, like Micron's work. And so the Micron piece adds an element. St. Luke's is getting ready to build their new hospital, of course, downtown. So there's some pretty big outliers that are kind of in process now, which makes it a level of busyness that's pretty consistent with where we've been. But we all know there are things that are paused for now. And so new construction of apartments and things downtown, or anywhere really, we're not seeing new submittals on that. But I can tell you right now that we have about 1,600 apartment units that are either under construction or in the permitting process that we think will proceed. 1,100 of those 1,600 are actually under construction. So over the next 18 to 24 months, we would probably see an additional 1,600 or so, maybe a little bit longer than 24 months, but I was thinking about the construction, but an additional 1,600 or so new apartment units added to the city. We are seeing, a fairly consistent level of new home single-family construction, even as we've gone through this period of higher interest rates and uncertainty around costs and things. Our level of single-family new construction has pretty much remained steady. So we will have a period of less busyness, I think, when it comes to obviously the apartments and mixed-use stuff, but it's kind of being replaced at this time by the Micron work and St. Luke's and a couple other kind of institutional submittals.
And I think for us too, it's not as much maybe a pause, but just have to do more of that due diligence. As you were saying, the construction costs have gone up a ton, interest rates have doubled. So it's how do we get these deals done and who are the users out there to cater to and how do we do that is probably what we're seeing right now. So maybe it's a little bit longer process too. It's not as fast as it used to be, but it's more timing and planning and who are those members we need to pull around to help get those deals done for sure.
We're seeing that a lot of city, county, and state work hasn't slowed down. Due to the tax base and collection of taxes, that they usually typically lag behind a couple years from commercial development. So that's still going very strong. But to reference the MICOM project again, or large projects like that, that has a wide-ranging effect to where it doesn't just affect the valley, but it also affects eastern Idaho, northern Idaho. We're working on a project in Idaho Falls, and they're referencing possible material procurement issues due to the Micron project. So it has wide-ranging effects throughout the state and the region, those larger scale projects. So it might look like a little bit of slowdown, even though it's this weird dynamic where construction costs are going up, but construction is still a little bit down right now, and that's one of the reasons for that is these larger developments that are occurring.
What other questions do you have?
With all the additional residential that's going downtown and everything seems to be getting more crowded, how will the parking be addressed? I noticed that in recent years, a lot of the streets have been narrowed and parking spaces along the streets have been taken away for wider pedestrian, which is great if you're already parked somewhere and walking, but how will additional parking be addressed in the city for the additional people that will be there? And I live downtown and noticing that it's much harder for guests to park.
Well, interesting. In terms of streets where they've been narrowed for pedestrians, I'm trying to think of where that would be.
Sixth Street
Sixth Street.
is 6th Street, where it's now down to 2 lanes between front and Main, I think it is. And the parking along 6th Street was taken away for more, more restaurant outdoor seating.
Okay.
And it's interesting because you get to that restaurant, there's nowhere to park.
Yeah, a few things about parking, I guess, and thanks for that, because I'm interested to know exactly where you're talking about. And 5th and 6th Street's a big discussion right now at the city. First, regarding parking, within this new ordinance, there was a lot of discussion about how much off-street parking the city requires, and there were those that think that we should really reduce the amount of off-street parking the city requires, and then others that think we shouldn't do that. So we ended up making modest changes in this new ordinance to off-street parking, and really those apply to more neighborhood zones. Like we went from within an R1 district, you used to have 2 spaces per unit off-street, and in the new ordinance it's 1 space per unit, but that's in neighborhood settings. In the commercial zone, we really didn't make much change. The area that's a little different though is downtown, because in the existing parlance, downtown is called C5 zoning. And the C5 district currently for downtown has these different parking overlays that require some off-street parking. In the new code, all that goes to something called MX5, which is mixed use kind of 5. And it has no parking requirements, so there's not those overlays. The thinking is that the government, the public, should not be requiring the off-street parking. That should be a market-driven decision. As you know, most people building housing are going to build the off-street parking because they want to be able to lease their apartments or their commercial space. So the government shouldn't tell you what to do. that should be a product of what you think you need. And we have cases downtown. I happen to live in a building that doesn't have any parking, or very little parking, so it's way less than you would normally think, and it works well. But from a regulatory standpoint, that's where we are. But then I also think from a city downtown vibrancy standpoint, that the thinking is that we really should prioritize people getting around outside of their cars, so walking, biking, using transit, and that Boise's at an important point when it comes to that. We have a lot of surface parking still downtown. We have a lot of parking in general, and people are building parking in most cases. Look at the Saratoga, which is under construction, or 12th and Idaho. These things, they have a tremendous amount of parking they're building with it, including public parking for the non-residential that's within it. But we have pinch points. I mean, 5th Street is not a place that has a lot of structured parking on it necessarily. On 5th and 6th, the effort right now is around converting those streets from one-way traffic in each direction to two-way, which is an ongoing effort of the city and CCDC to convert these one-way streets to two-way. And honestly, that's all in furtherance of this idea that you shouldn't be driving fast in downtown Boise because it's dangerous, and we want to encourage people to walk and ride their bikes. So a slow-moving car in an urban setting is a good thing. And so let's convert it to two-way. So I think the good news about parking is it'll never be good enough. You know, I mean, it's just like with traffic, right? I mean, anywhere you go, parking and traffic, people complain about it, regardless of how much of it there is. Every place I've been, Little Davidson, North Carolina, the traffic in downtown Davidson at the intersection of Concord Road and Main Street is the worst traffic in the world as far as people in Davidson are concerned. Same thing at King and Calhoun for Charleston and Peachtree and Lenox in Atlanta. I got news for you. You go to a little town in Iowa on a Sunday, people get back from church and they go, man, traffic was bad in downtown today, wasn't it? I mean, you know, there's no way to deal with it. It doesn't. So I think the main thing from the government standpoint is that we do what we can to make alternatives safer and more enjoyable for people, recognizing we all will continue to drive to do many things, but if we can get the car trips down from 10 trips per day per house, we can get that number down to 8 or 7 or 6. Now we're doing something as a community when it comes to congestion, and that means prioritizing other modes more than just parking and driving fast downtown.
Thank you. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes.
I've got one for Tim, I think, too. And maybe stealing a little bit of thunder from the lunchtime presentation, but you know, what are the metrics to understand the success of the zoning code rewrite? You know, I mean, medium term, so 5 years from now, right when things are finally, you know, you've got enough kind of data points of buildings that have been built, things that have changed, like, what are your metrics?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're talking a lot about that now. We've actually got a whole dashboard of things that we're going to be paying really close attention to once the new ordinance goes into effect on December 1st. And a lot of it has to do with, is the ordinance resulting in more new construction of the type we're seeking to make incentives for in this ordinance? So, the diversity of housing, for instance. Are we getting that diversity? Are we seeing, you know, single-family homes, but also duplexes and small apartment buildings in neighborhoods? Are we seeing these efforts to get denser development on these corridors and like Fairview or State? Are we seeing this have an effect? So a lot of the dashboard is going to be around, hey, we made incentives for these things, including our process. Are we seeing more of that? And over a 5-year period, the answer should be yes. And if it isn't, what we said to City Council when this was adopted in June is, we will come back to Council in a year, so December 1st it goes into effect. So December 1st of next year, we'll go back with a full report on how it's working, and especially to say whether those incentives are working. And if not, what we suggest as changes to make sure they do. We've got to remember, as I said when we started in 1966, we weren't experts in sprawl. We got to go in a different direction now. And we're not going to be experts in that out of the bat. And not just us, but you and everybody. Like, how do we build this way and do it faster? And so it's just an acknowledgement of we've got to track those things. And then we've got to be willing to make fine-tuned adjustments. We think the structure is really, really good in this new ordinance, but we know there'll be details that a year from now we feel like we need to, make adjustments to.
Terrific. And to kind of follow up on that, more will change in the next 15 to 20 years than has changed since 1966. So, is there a cadence that has developed to take a look at this and see what major rewrites might be needed down the line?
Well, we absolutely have said, we were going to come back, and this will be an ongoing conversation between us and everybody in this room, and then others that are in this business, to say, in a year, what changes do we need to make? And then we want to stay on that kind of cadence, annually going back and saying, how do we make this better? What have we learned? And that kind of thing. I think we should all be open to that. There's aspects of this new ordinance that have to do with, take a State Street, where the community's investing a lot in bus rapid transit. We need to see how that's working and be prepared to come back and make sure it's resulting in the outcomes that we're seeking as a community.
Awesome. One last call. Questions? Jason?
Do we have to wait till December 1st to submit based on the new zoning code?
Yeah, isn't it right, Crystal, that the lights get turned on, so to speak, on December 1st on the new one. So, and by the way, it will still be, the Planning and Zoning Commission and other commissions will still be hearing cases based on the existing code right now through at least February.
Yeah, so you can still submit under the current code. They'll be heard and decided based on the current code. We're thinking, like Tim said, probably finishing that up around March or so. At that point, we will probably start to be getting our first wave of Tech 3s and 4s that were submitted after the first, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for your questions, and thank you, panel, for bringing your expertise here. I think we made some headway here, so this is really true. Thank you. Let's do one next one.